I made a top-end overhaul video of my 2017 250XC two-stroke last year, and I've had quite a few comments saying I've installed the rings incorrectly and the ring end gap should be 180 degrees apart. So I thought I'd make this video to show in detail how the rings are fitted on the piston and answer those comments. This is a 250XC piston. It's done about 5 hours. I actually purchased it with a cylinder from someone who converted their bike to a 300, so I have this as a spare. And if you look at the top of the piston, you can see a marking here which indicates this is the exhaust side. So this is the intake. And then if you look at the ring grooves, you'll see in each of the grooves there's a pin to stop the rings rotating. It also locates the end gap in these positions. The pins are slightly offset, as you can see. All two-stroke pistons have these locators in the ring grooves. The reason being is you wouldn't want the rings rotating during use, or the ends of the rings could get hung up on the ports. Here you can see inside the cylinder, this is the intake side, and this is the top part of the cylinder. In the middle there's a small intake port, and on either side of it there's two larger ports. The piston ring gaps actually sit in this area and travel up and down, and they actually pass over this small port. But because there's bridges, the deflection of the rings is well controlled and it doesn't create an issue. And here you can see the exhaust side of the cylinder. In the middle is the exhaust port, and you can see the size is much larger and much wider than the individual intake ports. And certainly if the ring gaps were in this area, the ring could very easily get hung up on this port. So this is the reason why the ring end gaps are located on the inlet side. Okay, so I've put a ring in the cylinder, and you can see right now the ring is right down at the bottom of the stroke, so it's just below the intake port, which is here. And I've put the piston below the ring, so I can push on the piston and push the ring up through the bore, so you can see how it moves. And so right now it's halfway across the intake, and carry on up. And right now it's at the edge of the intake port, and I can just push it over. There's no resistance going over, so it clears that no problem. And then I'll carry on up to the top of the stroke, and then it stops about there. So this is the where the top ring position would be. Regarding installing the rings on the piston, there's one point you should be careful of, and that's the orientation. And if you look here carefully, you can see a mark, and that mark should be up towards the top of the piston. So make sure you get the orientation correct. And then to install a ring, being aware of the orientation, so the top mark being up, put one end of the ring into the groove and then just work round, and it should pop straight on. You don't need a lot of force. If you do use a lot of force, you can easily bend the ring, so just be careful with that. When it comes time to install the piston into the cylinder, you need to line up the ring gaps with the pins, like they are now. So when they're lined up correctly, you can fully compress the rings into the ring grooves and install the piston easily. If, for example, you had one of the end gaps offset and the ring was over a pin, that would mean you can't compress the ring into the groove, and you wouldn't be able to install the piston. So be careful about that. And lastly, I thought I'd show you a couple of other pistons. The one in the middle is a 300 piston. It's a bit wider than the 250 piston, but the biggest difference is the head of the piston is flat, whereas the 250 piston is domed. The ring design is the same, and it has pins here in the ring grooves to position the end gaps on the inlet side, so no big difference there. This piston is a 250 four-stroke piston, which you can see is a very different design. The head is shaped so it doesn't hit the valves. It's much wider than the two-stroke pistons and a lot shorter as well. And then the rings are free to rotate because there's no pins. There's no ports in a four-stroke cylinder, so it doesn't matter where the end gaps are. They can't get hung up on any ports. And typically you'd position the end gaps on the two rings 180 degrees apart from each other. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you're new to the channel and like it, please subscribe.